I'm sorry I became late because the lecture was at 5:30. So Praveen told me that we are going for little earlier by 15 minutes. So little unusual actually. So this is the last lecture basically. Yeah, last lecture. So are you all awake or should I make it little interactive? Huh? So we start from a case, a 46-year-old male, known case of adenocarcinoma, GE junction. Past history, there was left MC infarct roughly 8 months back, and he presented to our ER with acute severe dyspnea, cough, and chest pain. He was restless. He was conscious but disoriented. Heart rate was 130 and BP was 100 was 60. Oxygen saturation was 75% while breathing on room air. And he was afebrile. Chest, CVS per abdomen was normal. Lower extremities, there was left leg edema, no other apparent abnormalities. Chest X-ray was absolutely normal, and ECG, there was sinus tachycardia only. The patient undergoes endotracheal intubation and is mechanically ventilated with 100% oxygen. CVC, RFT, LFT, cognition profile all normal. So what can be the DDs in this case? Now you're thinking. So looking at patient history, patient is a case of cancer, acute onset. So the presentations are vague actually. You cannot directly say that this can be, but it can be definitely pulmonary embolism or not. It can be. Anything else which comes in your mind besides PE, because this is a lecture of PE, so definitely this can be a case of PE, but besides PE, what else? Septic shock? Possible. Patient is not having fever, yeah, but it can be possible. Any cardiac issue? Sinus tachycardia only. Saturation is low, so it can be pneumonia also. The clear lung fields. So pneumonia can take times to develop. Maybe it can be until unless you auscultate the patient. So you will not find it, right? So there can be different scenarios actually. You have not to focus like the things which I am saying. Basically, you have to keep your horizons little wide. So coming on pulmonary embolism, actually what is pulmonary embolism? It's the obstruction of the pulmonary artery or one of its branches by any material. Which material? Either thrombus or tumor or air or fat that originate elsewhere in the body. So basically the material which is inside the pulmonary artery is not pulmonary embolism, that we can say the CTP, chronic thrombopulmonary embolism. So if you want to diagnose acute PE, that means this material is originating elsewhere in the body, not exactly inside the pulmonary artery. So which is the latest guideline for PE? Can you tell me? Because as a student you should know which guidelines has been published recently for ACS, for hypertension, for PE, for dissection of aorta. What are the guidelines? 2019? I have not read till now. Because I searched yesterday extensively, but I didn't find, truly speaking. Yeah, so there are a lot of guidelines, but whenever you are actually quoting the guidelines, whenever examiner are asking question to you, you must quote the guidelines, right? This makes a difference because sometimes there is a little difference. If you look at the 2017 American Heart Association guidelines for hypertension, if you look at 2018 guidelines of European Society, so there is a big difference actually. If you look at the type of blood pressures, like what is the guidelines, blood pressures 120 by 80 or 130 by 80. So basically whenever you are whenever you are giving exam, you are giving answer, always try to quote the guidelines. So there are numerous guidelines. In 2017, the guidelines by American Academy of Family Physicians in combination with American College of Physicians. In 2011, we were having guidelines from American College of Emergency Physicians. In 2011, there was a guidelines from American Heart Association. In 2011, there was also guidelines from American College of Obstetrician and Gynecologists. Then in 2012, from American College of Radiology. And in 2012, 8 and 14, European Society is actually updating its guidelines on regular interval, almost at 4 years basically, or almost at 8 to 6 years. So we are having this 2014 guidelines which has not been updated till now. So whatever we are having, this is the latest guidelines for this PE. In 2015 we were having American College of Physicians guidelines, and 2012 and 16 from American College of Chest Physicians. But very beautiful guidelines. If you look at all these guidelines are given by European Society of Cardiology, which was published in 2014. So coming on the epidemiology, first the term, what is the term venous thromboembolism? What does it mean? Does it mean PE or DVT? or both? So basically VT means deep venous thrombosis as well as pulmonary embolism, because if you look at the epidemiology, there is no separate data for PE itself. The data is a combination for both DVT as well as PE. So it's third most frequent CVS disease, annual incidence 100 to 200 per 100,000. You can go by the guidelines also. Acute versus chronic disease and disability. So acute PE out of this is the most serious clinical presentations, is often preventable and more than 40 years at increased risk, and it doubles with subsequent decade, with each subsequent decade. So what are the predisposing factors for DVT? You tell me, what are the factors? Like broadly divide. I am taking your exam. I am asking that tell me the etiology of DVT. Broadly divide. So one is provoked, one is unprovoked. Provoked means a patient who is having no risk factor and having DVT. So one is provoked, one is unprovoked. Provoked means patient is having no risk factor. Like one of my colleague actually came to me, he was having swelling, I did an ultrasound and there was a DVT. Then we worked up. So what can be the cause? Those causes. No trauma, no cancer, nothing, no predisposing factors. Any genetic? So basically genetic versus environmental. So environmental are usually temporary and genetics are usually permanent. So what can be the genetic factors? Factor 5 deficiency, protein C, protein S, antithrombin third. So these are the things by which patient can present to you with DVT actually, not any other symptoms. Like provoked versus unprovoked. Provoked, most common is trauma, right? So the presence of persistent risk factor may affect the decision on the duration of anticoagulation. Like, so if a patient is having cancer, so my duration will be different. If I had trauma, I started on anticoagulation. For the DVT, my duration will be different. So the duration depends on the presence of persistent risk factors, right? So coming on pathophysiology, acute PE interferes with both the circulation and gas exchange. So you will find that whenever patient comes to you with massive PE, why there is hypoxemia? The massive PE means obstruction of pulmonary artery or its main branch. So there will be hypotension. The patient should be in shock. But why hypoxemia? Because of shunt? Anything else? VQ mismatch? The dead space ventilation because lungs are normal but there is a less blood supply. Anything else? So this is clear that patient presents with both difficulty, both problems, circulation as well as gas exchange, right? So PA pressures increases because of occlusion by thromboemboli, right? Then pulmonary vascular resistance increases. Why? Because of increased vasoconstriction, because of release of thromboxane A2 and serotonin. And after that, RV dilatation because of abrupt increase in PVR, and RV failure is the primary cause of death, right? So this is the circulation, right? Like in circulation, after that what happens actually, compensatory mechanism stops. How? Systemic vasoconstrictions, prolonged RV contraction time and activation of neurohormonal system. But extent of immediate adaptation is limited. So patient will be normal for quite some time, but again it will deteriorate. So after left valve bowing of interventricular septum, LV filling is impeded in early diastole, reduction of cardiac output and hemodynamic instability. So finally patient will come to you in shock, right? So after that what happens? Secondary hemodynamic destabilization start 24 to 48 hours after acute PE because of inflammatory response. But RV infarction is very uncommon, right? So this is the pathophysiology you can find in the books also. So now coming on the respiratory failure. Why respiratory failure in PE? Predominantly because of hemodynamic disturbances. Have you ever seen that your patient BP was 130/80 and saturation was 99? Suddenly you were doing some procedure, you are given some amount of propofol or midazolam and BP falls from 130 to 90 and 60 and saturation falls from 99 to 91 or 89 or 88. So what is the cause of that saturation? So the same cause is here. Predominantly because of hemodynamic disturbances there can be fall in saturation, right? Then desaturation of the mixed venous blood because of low cardiac output. Then ventilation perfusion mismatch because of dead space ventilation. Then right to left shunting to a patent foramen oval. Then pulmonary infarction, but this is actually little rare to find in PE, and effect is predominantly in patients with pre-existing cardiorespiratory diseases. Right. So, what are the common sites of PE? Common sites which we usually missed in compression ultrasonography. So, proximal veins of lungs, okay, popliteal, femoral, iliac, rare in pelvis, renal or upper extremities. So, iliofemoral is the most common source of PE, and this is actually very often it can be mixed in compression ultrasonography. So, whenever you are doing a compression ultrasonography and this is coming negative, don't think that your patient cannot have DVT or cannot have PE. So, how will you do risk stratification then? So, if you are suspecting acute PE, so just look at the shock or hypotension. So, it's a very good algorithm, especially for ICU patients. If a patient is having shock or hypotension, yes or no. So, what is the definition of shock or hypotension here? Because I will say the shock definition for septic shock is a bit different. So, basically they have defined it systolic blood pressure of less than 90 or systolic pressure drop by more than 40 millimeter of mercury for more than 50 minutes if not caused by new onset of arrhythmia, hypovolemia or sepsis. Then it will be considered as a new shock or new hypotension. If this is there, patient are at high risk. If this is not there, patient are at low risk or not at high risk. Right? So, diagnosis, three things main. One is clinical presentations. So, anything in clinical presentations, all vague actually. The pneumonia patient can present like PE, the sepsis patient can present like PE, any patients can present like PE. So, clinical presentation basically is non-specific, right? Dyspnea, chest pain, pre-syncope, syncope, hemopsis, arterial hypertension and shock, may be completely asymptomatic and may be discovered incidentally. So, clinical characteristics, if you look at this, basically this was the Emperor trial, this was the multi-center emergency medicine pulmonary embolism registry. It was published in 2011 in Journal of American College of Cardiology. So, 50% of patients were having basically dyspnea was present in 50% of patients and PE was confirmed in 50% of patients out of this dyspnea basically. Out of 100 patients, the dyspnea was present and only 50% patients were having PE. And 51% patients were not having PE. If you look at the chest pain, only 39% patients were having PE and 28% patients were not having PE. So basically these all are non-specific symptoms, but you can actually initiate your diagnostic algorithm, right? So coming on laboratory, any labs? D-dimer. Why D-dimer? You have told me first. It's rule out DVT, it's rule out PE. So in which group of patients we actually order D-dimer? If I am having the high probability of PE, so should I send the D-dimer? No. So only in low or intermediate probability. So if the D-dimer is coming negative in those group, we can virtually exclude the PE. But in high risk group, please don't send D-dimer. Right? Anything else? Huh? Tropi? Yes, definitely. Anything else? Huh? Anti-proBNP, so all are basically non-specific sort of. So ABG, hypoxia or hypocapnia. Chest X-ray, frequently abnormal but non-specific actually. You will not find much in chest X-rays. ECG, sinus tachycardia, RV, strain pattern. Sometimes we find a lot of findings that examiner can ask you. What are those findings? Q1, S3, T3. Okay. And 2D echo, RV dilatation will found in roughly 25% of patients. RV free wall hypokinesia, disturbed RV ejection fraction, that is called a 60-60 sign. Can anybody tell me what is 60-60 sign? It's basically we look at the pulmonary ejections versus tricuspid regurgitations. So this is less than 60 and more than 60. This is called a 60-60 sign. McConnell sign, a very common sign, very often asked in the exams. Apical sparing of ventricle basically is called a McConnell sign. So the rest of the ventricle will be normal, abnormal, hypokinetic, but the apex will be normal. So that is called as McConnell signs. Paradoxical movement of septum, newly increased RV systolic pressures. These all are echo findings. So what is this? Wedge shape opacity, which base pointing towards plural surface. It is called as Hampson hum. Okay, so it is Hampson hum. What is Westermarck sign? So what will you see in the X-ray? Will be actually oligemia. Actually, if you look at the upper and middle lobe, there is marked oligemia. This is called as Westermarck sign, right? So in echo findings, you will find that this is a bowing of right ventricle into the left ventricle. Right? Then coming on clinical probability, right? So clinical judgment lacks standardization, right? Use of prediction rules confirmed in several large series include PIOPAT trial basically, and Wells score extensively validated, Geneva score adequately validated. Then both have been simplified now, right? So, and validated also. So basically, this is very difficult. If you will ask me right now, what is Geneva score, what is Wells score, I will not able to tell you all components. And basically, these scores has not been made for the ICU patients. Remember, because how can you look for dyspnea, look for the tachycardia, look for the tachypnea in the ICU patients? So these scores are actually made for the OPDs patients, right? But for exam perspective, you have to remember all these scores exactly, not but is at least name. But these simplified scores are very simple actually, and you have to know that what are the scoring of these scores, right? So this is the Wells score. So I am not going into detail of this score, but yes, if you look at the two-level score. So two-level score is a modified score basically. PE unlikely if score is 0 to 1, if PE likely if score is more than 2. That's all. If you look at the Geneva score, so P two-level score, PE unlikely if score is more than 0 to 2, PE likely if score is more than 3. That's all. Otherwise, it's very difficult to remember actually. So you can check it in the books also. If you want to exactly write what is the score of this patient, I am suspecting P in this patient, that is the score, what is the whatever. So coming on D-dimer testing, D-dimer, its negative predictive value is very high in patient with only low or moderate pre-test probability, right? So different type of D-dimer testing is available. ELISA derived assays, quantitative latex derived assays, and whole blood agglutination assays, point of care test, and specificity decreases steadily with age to almost 10% in patient more than 80 years. So D-dimer value in older patients is not too good actually, because your specificity decreases very markedly. Diagnostic yield of D-dimer assays in excluding acute PE basically. This was taken from 3 studies. One was by Carrier, one was by Caron, and one was by Lesberg. So they basically beautifully demonstrated that PE prevalence in this was the PE excluded by D-dimer and clinical probability was 40%, and 3-month thromboembolic risk was only 0.1%. Here also it was 0.0% and 0.4%. So negative predictive value, we look at almost 100%, very good negative predictive value of D-dimer test. Then markers of myocardial injury, as you have already told, elevated plasma troponin concentrations, positive predictive value roughly 12 to 44%. Then why we send troponin levels? Because the value is very less. Again same, because of high negative predictive value. Okay, and hard type fatty acid binding protein HFAP. So again the things are same, negative predictive value is roughly 99%. So besides D-dimer, there are 2 markers, one is troponin and one is FAT, who are having very high negative predictive value. So coming on CTPA, okay, CTPA is a CT pulmonary angiography. So method of choice nowadays. So what is gold standard then? These are method of choice. I am not saying the gold standard. So what is the difference between method of choice and gold standard? Are you agree with me that this is method of choice, not gold standard? So what is gold standard? Huh? One person please. No, Vicky scan is not gold standard. Pulmonary angiography. Okay. So CTPA is the method of choice. Can be combined with CT venography. So in our hospital we put it CTPA with DVT protocol. So DVT protocol means CT venography of lower limbs including pelvis, or compression ultrasonography of legs. So you are doing a CTPA and simultaneously you are doing Doppler test of lower limbs. Adequate visualization of pulmonary arteries down to at least the segmental level. Sensitivity of 83% and specificity of 96%, it was proved in PIOPAD 2 trial. High negative predictive value, respectively 96% and 89% in low or intermediate clinical probability as assessed by the Wells group. So now tell me, if you are having low probability or intermediate probability and your patient CTPA came out to be negative, so what does it mean? No P. Again, if a patient is having a low or intermediate clinical probability and CTPA is coming positive, so further test is warranted or not? The first question is that why did you go for CTPA if there was a low probability or intermediate probability? And second scenario can be if you are having high clinical probability and your CTPA is coming negative. So this is clear cut given in these guidelines. This is still controversial that whether we have to proceed further or not, because your patient is having high clinical probability, your CTPA is coming negative, then how to go? Should we go for pulmonary angiography or not? Controversy. We don't know. Can be used as a stand-alone for excluding P also. In pregnancy, can we go for the CTPA? Yes. Sure? Yes. So what is the method of choice in pregnancy? CTPA? VQ scan. If your X-rays chest is normal, the first diagnosis is by VQ scan. But if there is some problem in the X-ray, the VQ scan will not come alright, or there is a contraindication of doing VQ scan, you can easily go for CTPA. There is no contraindication. You don't think of fetus radiation. You don't think of mother radiation. So CTPA is not contraindicated in pregnancy. Can you show me where is the embolism? So this is the which branch? Right main pulmonary trunk. This is the main pulmonary trunk. This is the right main pulmonary. This is the left pulmonary trunk. What is this? Descending thoracic aorta. What is this? And what is this? SVC, superior vena cava. So now coming on lung scintigraphy. VQ scan is an established diagnostic test. But the only flaws with VQ scan is I have never ever seen any VQ scan in my life, almost 12 years, because it needs a completely normal lung. A COPD patient, asthmatic patient, pneumonia patient, volume overload patient will not give you a clear picture. So that is pretty difficult for us. In ICU, we will not see any patient who is having a normal X-ray. So VQ scan, I have never seen. Pulmonary angiography is a gold standard, but rarely performed. That also I have not seen. MR angiography, although promising, is not yet ready for clinical practice because of low sensitivity. Compression venous ultrasonography, yes, it's the first method of choice. You should start from this. Sensitivity of 90% and specificity of approximately 95%, but depending on the observer who is doing this test. Right. So now coming on the strategies. If a patient is coming to you with suspected P as he is in shock or hypotension, so what will you do? You are having a high clinical probability. You are suspecting patient is having P and patient is in shock or hypotension. The definition we have already given. What is the definition of shock or hypotension? So, 2D echo. So basically, they have said that if CT angiography immediately available, yes or no. And if you can travel the patient with the shock or hypotension, means there is no, like you are thinking that I can take this patient to the angiography room, first go for the CT angiography. Why? Because even in echocardiography, there is this can take time actually to develop RV overload and the picture of echocardiography, and that is observer dependent, because somebody can see the McConnell sign, somebody can see the 60-60 sign, somebody cannot see. So first choice is CT angiography. If it is immediately available, go for CT angiography. If it is positive, start treatment. If it is negative, search for other cause of hemodynamic instability. Right. So the same thing which we were seeing, that patient was having high probability but CTPA is coming negative. So you want to go for further test of P, very controversial, but you have to search for other causes of hemodynamic instability. If this was not available or patient was too sick to travel to the CT angio room, you will go for the echocardiography. So echocardiography, if there is a sign of RV overload and no other test available, then you can start the treatment. If other tests are available or CT angio till the patient became stabilized, you can go for the CT angiography. But if there is no RV overload in echocardiography, then search for other cause of hemodynamic instability. Now second, suspected P without shock or hypotension. So you are having a high probability. Patient came to you, like my patient who was having normal blood pressure, but I was having high clinical probability because of he was having cancer, he was having left lower leg edema, he was having hypoxemia, he was having sinus tachycardia, he was having lot of other things. So how to proceed? Assess clinical probability of P. So I have assessed the clinical probability was high. So high clinical probability of P, you go for CT angiography. So in both the cases, you are going for CT angiography. So P confirmed, start treatment. No P, no treatment. So this is the difference, right? If the patient is of low intermediate clinical probability, then you will send D-dimer. Of a patient who is not hypertensive, not in shock, low probability, the first test will be D-dimer. So if D-dimer is negative, no treatment, no further workup. If D-dimer is positive, then go for further testing. So what is the best further testing? CT angiography. So no P, no treatment, P, treatment. Very simple. So patient in shock, CT angio or echo. Patient not in shock, high clinical probability, CT angio, low clinical probability, D-dimer, followed by CT angio. Clear? So this is basically another diagnostic strategies for the patient without shock or hypertension. You can go for compression ultrasonography, where there are relative contraindication for CT, like renal failure, allergy to contrast, or pregnancy. Pregnancy are relative contraindication. Always remember, this is asked always in the exams. Finding proximal DVT in a patient suspected of P is sufficient to warrant anticoagulative treatment without further testing. If you are suspecting P, patient is not in shock or hypertension, you have done COS and there is a DVT, start treatment. Assume that this is P. VQ scan, valid option for patient with an elevated D-dimer and non-availability of or contraindication of CT scan. So some clinical prognostic assessment, acute RV dysfunction, age more than 70 years, systolic BP less than 90, respiratory rate more than 20, cancer patients, CHF patients, COPD patients or concomitant DVT. So the prognosis is poor for these group of patients, right? So this we cannot actually do something, but at least we can tell the prognosis to the family. So there are some prediction rules also for the prognostic assessment. So Wells rules and Geneva schools was actually for the diagnosis, and this pulmonary embolism severity index is a prediction rule. So basically they are this score was very wide actually. Nobody can remember this score. So there was a simplified PASI. Simplified PASI is a pulmonary embolism severity index score, extensively validated. So I don't remember all this, but I remember this actually. So if you look at the risk factor, so they are given is a class 1, class 3, 0.30 day mortality is roughly 1%, and if point is more than 1, the mortality is roughly 10.9%. So if 1 point is adding the mortality of roughly by 10%. So you have to read all these scores for your exams. Others, echo finding, rise in BNP or anti-pro-BNP, elevated plasma troponins, elevated serum creatinine, elevated D-dimer, comorbid modalities and scores. So all these are prognostic assessments. So I am not going. So now coming on treatments. So what is the treatment of P? Anticoagulation. So before anticoagulation, if your patient is coming with massive P, so the patient will be in shock. So what is your first priority in that case? So obviously ABC is your first priority, right? So you will not start on like my patient is having P, the BP is 60, but my aim is to start on unfractionated heparin first. No, you have not to take care of that thing, you have to take care of ABC. After ABC, anticoagulation, right? So parenteral or oral or newer oral anticoagulants, we will discuss. Then thrombolytic treatment, then surgical embolectomy, then percutaneous catheter directed treatment, then venous filters, okay? So first, hemodynamic and respiratory supports, Acute RV failure with resulting low systemic output is the leading cause of death in these patients. So whenever you are going to intubate this patient, please remember a formula. Resuscitate before you intubate. If you will intubate this patient, they will crash, almost 100 patients will die out of 100 patients. So always resuscitate first, intubate later. Okay. Use of vasopression is often necessary. Don't wait. Give fluid, start vasopressors, bring BP up, then intubate the patients. Okay. Oxygen, mechanical ventilation, very cautiously. I have especially mentioned in my box, cautiously. Right. Then ECMO for massive P, we will discuss one slide of ECMO also. Then coming on anticoagulation. So immediate to prevent both early death and recurrent symptomatic or fatal VTE. It has to be started ASAP. Standard duration 3 months. Acute phase treatment with parenteral anticoagulations over 5 to 10 days, whether you can start on non-fractionated heparin or LMWH or fondaparinux. Then overlapping with vitamin K antagonist or newer oral anticoagulants like dabigatran or adaxaban. So basically this is the problem with dabigatran. If you ask like adaxaban, I have not seen because adaxaban is not come in India till now. So we are having dabigatran, we are having rivaroxaban, we are having apixaban. So dabigatran require prior anticoagulation, especially for proximal DVT and P. Always remember, you cannot start dabigatran without prior anticoagulation. But rivaroxaban or apixaban, you can start directly or after only 1 or 2 days of parenteral anticoagulations. So for dabigatran, you need prior anticoagulation by at least 3 to 5 days. Then extended anticoagulation beyond the first 3 months or even indefinitely in some cases, we will discuss those cases. So unfractionated heparin, how will you start? How will you monitor? Based on APTT, right? LMWH needs no routine monitoring, but periodic anti-10A level can be measured in pregnancy. Then fondaparinux, OD by subcutaneous injection at weight adjusted doses without the need for monitoring. So what is the therapeutic dose of fondaparinux? 5 milligram, 7.5 only. A weight of 120 kgs, 10. A weight of 40 kg, 5 milligrams. So what is the prophylactic dose of fondaparinux? Person of 40 kgs, 2.5, and person of 120 kg? No, it's 2.5 always. Prophylactic dose is 2.5, therapeutic dose is 5, 7.5 and 10. Okay. Contraindicated fondaparinux in severe renal insufficiency and elderly patients. We don't use in elderly patients. No proven case of it. Right. So this is for the unfractionated heparin. In exams, you can be asked for this. Basically, your target is 46 to 70 seconds of APTT. You have not to do any changes. This is the starting of APTT. If this is less than 35 seconds, you have to do 80 units per kg bolus. Then increase infusion rate by 4 units per kg per hour. If APTT initial was 35 to 45 seconds, you have to start from 40 units per kg bolus, then increase infusion rate by 2 units per kg per hour. And in this case, no change. Here you will reduce infusion rate by 2 units per kg per hour. And if this is more than 90 seconds, you will stop infusion for 1 hour, then reduce infusion rate by 3 units per kg per hour. Now coming on enoxaparin, can you tell me what is the dose of enoxaparin, therapeutic dose? 1 mg per kg. BD or OD? BD. Any other dose? 1.5 mg per kg OD. So basically this is also available in 80 mg. Basically usually we have a patients of roughly 60 kgs. So either we have to give 60 mg BD or we can give 80 mg OD also. Right? And what about deltaparin? 100 units per kg BD or 200 units per kg OD. Okay. So 1 mg per kg BD, 1.5 mg per kg OD. There are 100 units per kg BD or 200 units per kg OD. Then fondaparinux 5 mg, 7.5 and 10 mg OD. Now vitamin K antagonist, when should this start? If you will start vitamin K antagonist without starting anticoagulation, what will happen? Hey, tell me, one person please. Thrombosis, why? What it is called? purpura fulminans. Why? Because there is an anticoagulation. Why thrombosis with anticoagulation? Because it's inhibitor of protein C. So you will not start with anticoagulation. It will inhibit protein C and patient will be more thrombotic in the initial state. Patient can come to you with purpura fulminans. So when it has to be started? After anticoagulation. So after how many days? 5 days. On the same day you can start it. But the anticoagulation you cannot stop before 3 to 5 days. The same day you can start because the drug which you are giving subcutaneously will take care of those protein C and there will be 3 to 5 days. The vitamin K antagonist will take over its role. You can stop that anticoagulation. So should be initiated ASAP or on the same day. No problem at all. Parenteral anticoagulation should be continued for at least 5 days until the INR has been 2 to 3 for 2 consecutive days. Okay. Starting dose 10 mg in younger, 5 mg in older patient and those who are hospitalized. The daily dose is adjusted according to the INR, aiming at 2 to 3. So newer anticoagulants, lot of studies you have to read by its own, recover trial, recover true trial, Einstein trial, Einstein P trial, amplify, lot of things you have to read by your own, right? So thrombolytic treatments restore pulmonary perfusion more rapidly than anticoagulation with UFH alone. Okay. The hemodynamic benefit of thrombolysis are confined to the first few days only. So you have to start your patients on anticoagulation also. Accelerated regimen administered over 2 hours are preferable to the prolonged infusions. Have you ever used RTPA in a patient who is having cardiac arrest? You are doing CPR and you are suspecting that this is PE by looking at whatever echocardiography. So have you given ever? So what is the dose for that? 100 milligram. So 2 hours, will you do CPR for 2 hours of that patient? 2 hours are too much actually. So is there any other regimen for these patients? 10 minutes regimen. How much is the dose for that? 100 milligram. You have to know this thing because this is called as accelerated regimen. Super accelerated regimen, this is must. I have given a lot of times when my patient had cardiac arrest and I am suspecting P, I have given RTPA. But 100 milligram over 2 hours, no, it's not recommended because the patient, you cannot do CPR for 2 hours, you want immediate actually relief, right? So basically if you talk about RTPA, given 100 milligram over 2 hours or 0.6 mg per kg over 15 minutes. Right? If a patient of 60 kgs, you can give 30 milligram over 15 minutes because maximum dose is 50 milligram. So if a patient is of 100 kgs, you cannot give it 60 milligram, you will give it 50 milligram. But this is called a super accelerated regimen and this is usually followed when patient is having cardiac arrest and having PE and you want to thrombolize the patient. So contraindications, you can read your contraindications. Then surgical embolectomy, percutaneous catheter directed treatment if thrombolysis is contraindicated or has failed. Preoperative thrombolysis increases the risk of bleeding, is not an absolute contraindication to surgical embolectomy. Then venous filters when there is a contraindication of anticoagulations and recurrent embolism on adequate therapy. So duration of anticoagulation treatment 3 months, minimum 3 months. So secondary to transient risk factor oral anticoagulation for at least 3 months. Unprovoked PE for at least 3 months. Second episode of unprovoked PE indefinite. Okay. PE with cancer. Sure. Lifelong. No. कैंसर ठीक हो गया सपोज 2 महीने बाद कैंसर ठीक हो गया कीमोथेरेपी दिया and patient is all right now. So LMWH for 3 to 6 months and post 6 months query. Treatment with LMWH or VK is recommended as long as the disease is considered active. So if disease is cured, you can stop. Okay, because you have removed the risk factor now. The cancer itself is a procoagulant state. So if there is a no cancer, no procoagulant, no need of anticoagulation. So coming on ECMO, which is the last slide actually. Not well defined role and no RCT for ECMO in PE. 2014 European Society of Cardiology guidelines has incorporated ECMO for massive PE, contraindications to systemic thrombolysis or to give hemodynamic support, but and adjunct to surgical embolectomy. But 2016 CHEST guidelines did not mention about ECMO. multiple case reports and small series cited benefits. I have also gone through multiple case reports, but because this was very difficult in 25 minutes to cover up, so you can read, because in the exams you can ask for the role of ECMO in massive PE. But this is for sure, whatever case reports, whatever series I have read, these all were for massive PE, not for stable PE. So to conclude, management of PE requires a high suspicion, quick diagnosis and treatments, lot of guidelines, and but always up your clinical sense to manage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So it's end of day 3. See you.